A rich Texas CEO abandons his pregnant wife for secretary, shocked when she returns as millionaire with twins. Joaquin, we need to talk. Rosalinda stood in the doorway of his office, her voice steady but her hands trembling as she held a photograph. Behind her, two small faces peered out, children with his dark eyes and her gentle smile. These are your children, Joaquin. Mateo and Luna. They're 5 years old, and they've been asking about their father. Joaquin's hand shook as he stared at the photograph, his billion-dollar empire suddenly feeling worthless compared to what he saw before him. Rosalinda. Don't, she said quietly. Don't say you're sorry. Sorry doesn't give back 5 years of their lives. Sorry doesn't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I was strong enough to raise them alone. Welcome to Lux Love Chronicles with Mr. Wentworth. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here with me today. We're currently at 200 subscribers and counting, and watching this channel grow means the world to me. Each one of you who takes time to listen to these stories fills my heart with such gratitude. Before we dive into today's story, I want to say a quick prayer for all my beloved subscribers. Heavenly Father, I lift up every person listening to this story today. Bless them with wisdom in their decisions, strength in their challenges, and peace in their hearts. May they find joy in the small moments and courage to pursue what truly matters. Protect their families, guide their steps, and let love be the foundation of everything they build. Amen. Now, let me tell you a story that will challenge everything you think you know about success and what really matters in life. This is the story of Joaquin Vega, a man who built an empire in Texas but lost his soul until one moment changed everything forever. If stories of redemption and second chances inspire you, hit that like button now and let me know in the comments what you value most in life. The Texas sun blazed mercilessly over the oil fields of Midland County, where 23-year-old Joaquin Vega wiped the sweat and crude from his weathered hands. His back ached from another 14-hour shift, but his eyes burned with something more powerful than the desert heat: ambition. "Oi, Joaquin," called out Martinez, his crew chief. "You staying late again?" "Si, chief," Joaquin replied, not looking up from the geological surveys spread across a makeshift table. "Just studying the formation patterns." Martinez shook his head with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Son, you've been out here since dawn. When do you sleep?" Joaquin finally looked up, his dark eyes intense with determination. "I'll sleep when I own these fields, not when I'm just working them." The other workers laughed, but there was something in Joaquin's voice that made the laughter die quickly. This wasn't just another dreamer talking big. This was a man with a plan. That evening, Joaquin drove his beaten-up pickup truck to the community college where he'd been taking night classes in petroleum engineering and business. The parking lot was nearly empty when he arrived, but one figure sat on the steps waiting for him. Rosalinda Morales looked up as he approached, her nursing textbooks balanced on her lap. Even exhausted from her own long day at the hospital, she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "You're late," she said with a smile that made his heart skip. "Sorry, mi amor." The new survey results came in, and she stood and kissed him gently, cutting off his explanation. "I know. You're going to change the world, remember? I'm just making sure you don't forget to eat while you're doing it." She handed him a warm container of homemade enchiladas. They'd been dating for 8 months, and she still brought him dinner whenever their schedules aligned. "Rosa, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," she said firmly. "Because I believe in you, Joaquin Vega. When everyone else sees a field worker with big dreams, I see a man who's going to build something extraordinary." They sat on those college steps under the Texas stars, sharing dinner and dreams. Joaquin spread out his business plan on the concrete between them, his voice growing more animated as he explained his vision. "Look here," he said, pointing to hand-drawn diagrams. "These fields everyone thinks are played out? They're not. The technology exists to extract oil from deeper formations. We just need the capital to prove it." Rosalinda studied the papers with genuine interest. "How much capital?" $2 million to start. Maybe 3 for the equipment we'd need." She whistled softly. "That's a lot of enchiladas." He laughed, the first real laugh he'd had all day. "See, but Rosa, if I'm right, if this works, we could have our own company, our own future. Maybe even—" He trailed off, suddenly shy. "Maybe even what?" she prompted gently. "Maybe even a family someday. Kids who never have to worry about where their next meal comes from." Rosalinda took his oil-stained hand in hers. Then we'll make it happen. Whatever it takes. 3 years later, Joaquin stood in a small office above a garage in downtown Houston, staring at a rejection letter from his 15th bank. The letterhead might as well have been a death certificate for his dreams. Mr. Vega, the loan officer had said that morning, barely looking up from his paperwork, your projected returns are optimistic. And frankly, your collateral is insufficient for a loan of this magnitude. Now, as evening fell, Rosalinda climbed the narrow stairs to their makeshift headquarters. She found him slumped over his desk, his head in his hands. Bad news? She asked softly. The worst. Citizens Bank said no. That was our last shot, Rosa. I've pitched to every bank in Texas. She set down 2 cups of coffee and pulled up a chair beside him. So what do we do now? He looked up at her with tired eyes. Rosa, maybe everyone's right. Maybe I'm just a dreamer who doesn't know when to quit. Hey, she said sharply, turning his face toward her. Look at me. Do you remember what you told me 3 years ago? That you'd sleep when you owned those fields. He nodded. Well, I've been watching you, Joaquin. You barely sleep now. You work 18-hour days. You study every night. You've learned more about petroleum geology than men with 20 years' experience. If the banks can't see what I see, then we find another way. What other way? We've tried everything. Rosalinda stood and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of Houston. Private investors. Venture capital. People who think bigger than banks. We don't have connections to people like that. She turned back to him with a smile. No, but we have something better. We have a revolutionary idea and the passion to make it work. Sometimes that's enough. The next morning, Rosalinda surprised him by announcing she'd arranged a meeting. With who? Joaquin asked as she straightened his tie in their tiny apartment. Daniel Meridian. He owns Meridian Capital. Joaquin's eyes widened. Rosa, how did you? His daughter was in a car accident last month. Brought to our ER. I was her nurse for 3 days. When he found out I was engaged to a petroleum engineer with big dreams, he said he'd listen to your pitch. 1 meeting, Joaquin. Make it count. The Meridian Capital offices occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown Houston skyscraper. As the elevator climbed, Joaquin's palms grew sweaty despite the air conditioning. You've got this, Rosalinda whispered, squeezing his hand. Remember, you're not asking for charity. You're offering him the chance to be part of something historic. Daniel Meridian was a tall, silver-haired man in his 60s with sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through to a person's soul. His corner office had panoramic views of the city, and every surface spoke of wealth and power. Mr. Vega, Meridian said, gesturing to a conference table. My daughter speaks very highly of your fiancée. Says she's the best nurse in the hospital. She is, sir. The best at everything she does. Meridian smiled. High praise. Now, tell me about these oil fields that every bank in Texas thinks are worthless. For the next hour, Joaquin presented his vision with a passion that filled the room. He showed geological surveys, explained new extraction technologies, and painted a picture of American energy independence that made even Meridian lean forward with interest. Your projections show a return of 300% in the first 2 years, Meridian said when Joaquin finished. That's aggressive. It's conservative, sir. I believe we could see 400% or higher. And what makes you so confident? Joaquin exchanged a glance with Rosalinda, then leaned forward. Because I've spent 4 years studying these fields while other people gave up on them. I've run every calculation, examined every survey, tested every theory. This isn't a gamble, Mr. Meridian. This is inevitable. Meridian was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers spread across the table. Finally, he looked up. 3 million, he said. 50-50 partnership. You provide the expertise and sweat equity. I provide the capital and connections. Joaquin's hand shook as he reached across the table. Deal. As they shook hands, Meridian smiled. Son, something tells me this is going to be the beginning of something extraordinary. Walking out of that building, Rosalinda threw her arms around Joaquin's neck right there on the sidewalk. We did it. She laughed, spinning in his arms. We actually did it. No, he said, looking into her eyes. You did it. You made this happen, Rosa. I couldn't have done any of this without you. We're partners, remember? In everything. That night, in their tiny apartment, They celebrated with champagne that cost more than their monthly grocery budget. As they sat on their second-hand couch, Joaquin pulled out a small velvet box. "Rosa," he said, dropping to one knee. "I know we're already engaged, but I bought this today, after the meeting, because I realized something." She gasped as he opened the box to reveal a modest but beautiful diamond ring. "I realized that I don't just want to build a company with you. I want to build a life. A real life, with everything we've dreamed of. Will you marry me? Officially this time." Through tears of joy, she whispered, "Sí, mi amor. Always sí." 5 years later, Vega Petroleum occupied a gleaming office building in downtown Dallas, its logo visible from miles away. Joaquin, now 31, commanded boardrooms with the same intensity he'd once brought to those oil fields. But somewhere between the first million and the first 100 million, something had begun to change. "The Tokyo expansion is ready for your approval," said Valentina Restrepo, setting a stack of contracts on his desk. She was 28, brilliant, and ambitious, everything a successful CEO needed in an executive assistant. Joaquin barely looked up from his computer screens. Revenue projections? Conservative estimate, 50 million in the first year. Optimistic, 75 million. Make it happen. Valentina lingered by his desk, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the mahogany surface. "There's one more thing. Your wife called. She wanted to remind you about dinner tonight." For the first time all day, Joaquin looked up. "Dinner? Your anniversary dinner? Reservations at Giovanni's for 7. He glanced at his watch, 6:45 p.m. "Cancel it." "Sir, the Meridian contract review is tomorrow. I need these numbers perfect." Valentina's expression softened with what looked like concern. "Mr. Vega, perhaps you should," I said, "cancel it." An hour later, Rosalinda appeared in his office doorway. She wore the red dress he'd bought her for their first anniversary, and her hair was styled the way he used to love. But her eyes held a sadness that made his chest tighten. "Working late again?" she asked quietly. "The Meridian review is tomorrow." "I know." She walked to his desk and sat in the chair across from him. "Do you remember what today is?" Of course he remembered. It was their 5th wedding anniversary. But admitting that would mean admitting he'd chosen work over her. "Rosa, this deal is worth 200 million. If we don't close it today, will the world end?" Her voice was gentle, but there was steel underneath. He set down his pen and really looked at her for the first time in weeks. She was still beautiful, but there was something different. A distance that hadn't been there before. "What's wrong?" he asked. "When's the last time we had dinner together?" "Not at a business function, not with clients. Just us." Joaquin thought about it and realized he couldn't remember. "When's the last time we talked about something other than oil futures and stock prices?" Again, silence. "When's the last time we talked about having children?" That stopped him cold. Children had always been part of their plan, part of their dream. But lately... "Rosa, we've been busy. Building the company, expanding the operations. Once we're established, we are established, Joaquin. We have more money than we ever dreamed of. We have everything we said we wanted. Except each other." Before he could respond, Valentina knocked on the door. "Excuse me, Mr. Vega." The call with the Singapore investors moved up. "They're waiting on line 1. Joaquin looked from Valentina to Rosalinda, torn between the two worlds that seemed increasingly impossible to balance. "Take it," Rosalinda said quietly, standing up. "I understand." But as she walked away, Joaquin heard her whisper something that chilled him to the bone. "I just don't know if I can keep understanding forever." Later that night, when he finally arrived home at nearly midnight, the house was dark. He found Rosalinda asleep on the couch, still wearing her red dress. A cold dinner for 2 still set on the dining room table. He stood there for a long moment, looking at the woman who had believed in him when no one else would, who had made his dreams possible. She looked smaller somehow, fragile in a way that frightened him. But then his phone buzzed with emails from Tokyo and Singapore and London, and the moment passed. There would be time for romance later, he told himself. After the next deal, after the next expansion, after they'd really made it. He didn't notice the pregnancy test hidden beneath a stack of magazines on the coffee table. 3 months later, Rosalinda stood in their marble-floored kitchen, staring at the pregnancy test in her trembling hands. The pink lines were unmistakable, undeniable, beautiful. Twins. The ultrasound appointment that morning had confirmed what she'd hoped and feared in equal measure. 2 tiny heartbeats, 2 little lives growing inside her. The children they'd always dreamed of having. She heard Joaquin's car in the driveway and quickly hid the test in her purse. She wanted this moment to be perfect, the way they'd always imagined it would be. Joaquin, she called as he came through the front door. "How was your day?" "Brutal," he replied, loosening his tie as he walked into the kitchen. The environmental impact study came back with concerns about the new drilling sites. "Valentina thinks we should pivot to offshore operations, but the maritime regulations are—" "Joaquin," she interrupted gently. "Can we talk?" He paused, finally looking at her. "Really looking? Is something wrong? You look different." Rosalinda's heart raced. This was it. The moment that would change everything. "I went to the doctor today," she said softly. His expression immediately shifted to concern. "Are you sick?" "What did they—" "I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Joaquin's face went through a series of emotions, surprise, confusion, and something that looked almost like panic. "Pregnant," he repeated slowly. "With twins," she added, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Rosalinda saw something in his eyes that made her blood run cold. Not joy, not excitement, fear. "Twins," he said again, running his hands through his hair. "Rosa, the timing, the Meridian expansion, the Tokyo deal, what about them?" she asked, though part of her already knew where this was heading. "This is the most critical time in the company's history. We're on the verge of international expansion, of becoming a global player. I can't afford distractions right now." The word hit her like a physical blow. Distractions? You know what I mean. Pregnancies are complicated. There are doctor's appointments and complications, and you'll need me to what? To be a husband? To be a father? Joaquin's phone buzzed on the counter. Without thinking, he glanced at it. "Don't," Rosalinda said sharply. "Don't you dare look at that phone right now." But it was too late. She'd seen the shift in his attention, the way his priorities realigned themselves in real time. "It's from Valentina," he said. "The Singapore contracts." "I don't care if it's from the president himself." Rosalinda's voice cracked with emotion. "I just told you we're having children, Joaquin. Your children. And you're worried about contracts? Rosa, you don't understand the pressure I'm under. The responsibility. No, you don't understand." Tears were streaming down her face now. "I've been trying to tell you for weeks. We've been trying to have this conversation for months. But you're never here, Joaquin. Even when you're home, you're not really here." His phone buzzed again. This time, he deliberately ignored it, but the damage was done. "How far along?" he asked quietly. 12 weeks. "And you waited until now to tell me?" The accusation in his voice was the final straw. "I waited because I wanted to be sure. I waited because I wanted it to be special. I waited because I thought my husband would want to celebrate the greatest news of our lives. Of course I want to celebrate, but..." "But what?" "But your business is more important? But money matters more than family? But building an empire is worth more than building a life together." Joaquin opened his mouth to argue, but Rosalinda held up a hand to stop him. "You know what the saddest part is," she said, her voice now deadly calm. 5 years ago, you would have picked me up and spun me around. You would have called everyone we knew. You would have been over the moon. 5 years ago, we didn't have... We didn't have what? Money? Success? Or did we just not have hearts made of stone?" His phone buzzed a third time. Without thinking, Joaquin glanced at it again. "Answer it," Rosalinda said quietly. "What?" "Answer the phone, Joaquin. I can see it's killing you not to." "Rosa, I answer it. Let me see what's more important than your wife and your unborn children." With shaking hands, Joaquin picked up the phone. "Hello, Valentina." Rosalinda watched his face change as he listened to whatever crisis demanded his immediate attention. She watched the man she'd fallen in love with disappear behind the mask of a CEO who had no time for anything that didn't fit on a spreadsheet. "I'll be right there," he said into the phone. As he hung up, Rosalinda was already walking toward the door. "Where are you going?" he called after her. "To my sister's house. To think. Rosa, we need to talk about this." About the babies, about what this means. She turned back to him, and the look in her eyes broke his heart. What this means, Joaquin, is that our children will grow up wondering why their father loves money more than he loves them. Just like I'm wondering why my husband loves his business more than he loves me. The door closed behind her with a finality that echoed through the empty house. Joaquin stood alone in their kitchen, surrounded by marble and granite and all the symbols of success they'd worked so hard to achieve. His phone buzzed again. This time, he didn't hesitate to answer. After all, Valentina was waiting. 3 weeks after Rosalinda left for her sister's house, the mansion felt like a mausoleum. Joaquin threw himself into work with an intensity that worried even his most dedicated employees. He was first in the office each morning and last to leave each night, as if staying busy could somehow silence the voice in his head that whispered he was making the biggest mistake of his life. "Mr. Vega?" Valentina knocked softly on his office door. It was nearly 11 p.m., and the building was empty except for the two of them. "I brought the revised Singapore contracts." She entered carrying a stack of papers and 2 cups of coffee, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor. Even at this late hour, she looked impeccable, not a hair out of place, her silk blouse crisp despite the long day. "You didn't have to stay so late," Joaquin said, though he was grateful for the company. The silence of the empty office had been eating at him. "Neither did you," she replied, setting the coffee on his desk and settling into the chair across from him. "But here we are." There was something in her tone that made him look up from his papers. She was studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You look terrible," she said bluntly. Despite everything, he almost smiled. "Thank you. That's exactly what every CEO wants to hear." "I'm serious, Joaquin. When's the last time you went home?" Really went home, not just to shower and change clothes. The use of his first name should have surprised him, but it didn't. Over the past months, the professional boundaries between them had been slowly dissolving. "Home isn't very appealing right now," he admitted. Valentina leaned forward, her voice softening. "She'll come back. Women always do when they realize what they're giving up." "Will she?" "I'm not so sure anymore." "Joaquin," Valentina said, reaching across the desk to touch his hand. "You're building something extraordinary here. An empire that will last generations. Some people understand that kind of vision, and some don't." Her fingers were warm against his skin, and he found himself not pulling away. "Rosalinda used to understand," he said quietly. "She was the one who believed in me first. That was before you became successful, before you had real power, real wealth. Some people can't handle that kind of transformation in their partner." Joaquin looked into Valentina's dark eyes and saw something that had been missing from his life for months: admiration. Uncomplicated, unquestioning admiration for who he'd become rather than grief for who he'd been. "You understand, don't you?" he asked. "I understand that you're a man destined for greatness. I understand that you're building something that will change the industry forever. And I understand that not everyone is strong enough to stand beside a man like you." The space between them seemed to shrink. Joaquin was acutely aware of her perfume, of the way the lamplight caught the curve of her neck, of how different this felt from the heavy silences that had filled his conversations with Rosalinda. "Valentina," he began, not sure what he was going to say. "Yes. He stopped himself, pulling his hand back. "We should probably call it a night." But as she gathered the papers, her fingers brushed his again, and this time the contact felt electric. "Of course," she said softly. "But Joaquin, whatever happens, you should know that some of us see exactly how brilliant you are. Some of us appreciate the sacrifices you make." After she left, Joaquin sat alone in his office, staring out at the city lights. For the first time in weeks, he felt wanted, appreciated. Like the man he'd worked so hard to become was worthy of admiration rather than criticism. He tried calling Rosalinda, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again the next morning and the morning after that. Each unanswered call felt like another nail in the coffin of their marriage. Meanwhile, Valentina was always there, working late beside him, bringing him coffee, listening to his ideas with genuine excitement rather than worried concern. She understood the language of power and ambition in ways that Rosalinda never had. "The environmental groups are protesting the offshore expansion," Valentina reported a week later, setting the morning news on his desk. "They're calling it ecological terrorism." "Let them protest," Joaquin replied, not looking up from his computer. "We have all the necessary permits." That's what I told the reporter from the Houston Chronicle. I said Vega Petroleum is committed to responsible development and economic growth. He finally looked up at her. "You spoke to a reporter? I hope that was all right. I know how much you hate dealing with the media, and you were in the Singapore conference call." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched him more than it should have. Rosalinda had always encouraged him to handle his own press relations, to be more accessible to journalists. But Valentina understood that his time was too valuable for such distractions. "Thank you," he said. "That was perfect." She smiled, and he noticed how different her smile was from Rosalinda's. Where his wife's smiles had been warm and comforting, Valentina's was sharp and knowing. "Dangerous. There's one more thing," she said, closing his office door behind her. "I got a call from your wife's lawyer this morning." Joaquin's blood went cold. What did they want? To discuss terms for a legal separation. The words hit him like a physical blow. Separation. Not reconciliation, not couples therapy, not even an angry phone call demanding he come home. Legal separation. Did she mention the babies? Valentina's expression softened with what looked like sympathy. "I'm sorry, Joaquin. The lawyer said she lost them. Early in the second trimester. Stress-related complications." The room tilted around him. The twins, his children, gone. And Rosalinda had been dealing with that loss alone while he'd been here, building his empire, letting another woman comfort him. "I need to call her," he said, reaching for his phone with shaking hands. But Valentina was already at his side, her hand gentle on his shoulder. "She doesn't want to talk to you right now." The lawyer was very clear about that. "But the babies. I should be there." "I should what?" "You can't undo what happened, Joaquin. And maybe this is for the best." He looked at her sharply. "For the best. Think about it. Children would have complicated everything. Your travel schedule, the international expansion, the time demands of building a global company. Maybe the universe is telling you something." The cold calculation in her voice should have repulsed him. Instead, it felt like relief. Someone who understood that success required sacrifice. Someone who wouldn't ask him to choose between love and ambition. When she kissed him that night, it felt like surrendering to gravity. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier to his office. Joaquin signed them with hands that barely trembled, though inside he felt like he was signing his own death warrant. 6 months later, Joaquin stood at the altar of St. Mary's Cathedral, watching Valentina walk down the aisle in a designer gown that cost more than most people's cars. The society pages called it the wedding of the decade, and every powerful family in Texas was in attendance. But as he watched his new bride approach, all he could think about was another wedding 5 years earlier, in a small church in Houston. Rosalinda had worn her grandmother's dress and carried wildflowers from their garden. She cried when she saw him waiting at the altar, tears of pure joy that had made him feel like the luckiest man alive. Valentina didn't cry. She smiled with the satisfaction of a woman who had just achieved exactly what she'd set out to achieve. "Do you, Joaquin Vega, take Valentina Restrepo to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," he said, though the words felt like ash in his mouth. The reception was held at the Four Seasons, with champagne that cost $500 a bottle and a 7-course dinner prepared by a Michelin-starred chef. Joaquin smiled and shook hands and accepted congratulations from politicians and oil executives and society mavens who whispered about what a perfect match this was. "She's exactly what you need," Daniel Meridian told him during the reception, clapping him on the shoulder. "Beautiful, intelligent, ambitious. She'll be a real asset to your political aspirations." Political aspirations. When had those become part of his dreams? When had love become about assets and political advantages? But as he watched Valentino work the room, charming donors, cultivating contacts, building the kind of social network that could support a man with real power, he had to admit that Meridian was right. She was exactly what the CEO of Vega Petroleum needed. Even if she was nothing like what Joaquin Vega had once dreamed of. 5 years after his second wedding, Joaquin stood in his corner office, master of an empire that stretched across 4 continents. Vega Petroleum was now worth $12 billion, with operations in Texas, California, Singapore, London, and Dubai. He owned mansions in 3 countries, a yacht that could host state dinners, and political influence that senators courted. He was also the most miserable man in America. His marriage to Valentina had been everything she'd promised it would be, strategically perfect and emotionally barren. She was the ideal CEO's wife, beautiful and brilliant at corporate events, but their relationship felt more like a business partnership than a marriage. They lived separate lives in their mansion in River Oaks, connecting only when public appearances required it. She had her charity galas and shopping trips to Paris. He had his board meetings and international deals. And late at night, when the house was quiet and the servants had gone home, he found himself thinking about a woman he'd thrown away for an empire that felt increasingly hollow. "Sir." His current assistant knocked on the door. "The courier package you were expecting?" Joaquin looked up from his quarterly reports. "What package? The one from California?" "It's marked personal." His heart stopped. California. In 5 years, only one person had ever contacted him from California. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope and found a single photograph. 2 children, a boy and a girl, playing in what appeared to be an elaborate garden. They looked to be about 5 years old, with dark hair and eyes that were unmistakably familiar. His children, the twins he thought were lost. Alive, healthy, beautiful. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting he would recognize anywhere, were the words, Mateo and Luna Morales. "Perhaps someday, when you're ready to be the father they deserve, we can talk." Or she'd kept her maiden name, given it to their children, erased him from their lives as completely as if he'd never existed. But they existed. His children were alive, and they were thriving without him. "Cancel my meetings," he told his assistant, already reaching for his coat. "Sir, you have the board presentation this afternoon and the dinner with the mayor. Cancel everything. I'm going to California." The flight from Dallas to San Francisco gave Joaquin 3 hours to think, to remember, to hope. He'd hired the best private investigator money could buy the moment he'd seen that photograph, and the report had arrived just as his plane was taking off. Rosalinda hadn't just survived without him, she'd thrived beyond his wildest imagination. After leaving Texas, she'd used her nursing background and fierce determination to launch a sustainable energy consulting firm. Aurora Solutions had started as a one-woman operation advising small businesses on green energy transitions. Now, 5 years later, it was a multi-million-dollar enterprise that consulted for Fortune 500 companies looking to reduce their carbon footprint. The irony wasn't lost on him. His ex-wife had built her fortune helping companies move away from the fossil fuels that had made his fortune. The address led him to a stunning Victorian mansion in Pacific Heights, its gardens meticulously maintained, and its architecture speaking of both taste and prosperity. This wasn't the struggling single mother he'd imagined, but a woman who'd built her own empire. Joaquin sat in his rental car for 20 minutes, gathering courage he'd thought he'd lost forever. Through the wrought iron gates, he could see children playing in the garden, his children, though they didn't know it yet. When he finally approached the front door, his hands were shaking like a teenager on his first date. The door opened before he could ring the bell. Rosalinda stood there, and time stopped. She was more beautiful than his memories, maturity having added depth to her already stunning features. Her long black hair was now styled in an elegant bob, and she wore a flowing white dress that somehow made her look both ethereal and powerful. But it was her eyes that undid him, Still warm, still kind, but now carrying a strength that took his breath away. "Hello, Joaquin," she said quietly, her voice carrying no trace of the broken woman he'd left behind. Behind her, 2 small faces peered out, Mateo and Luna, 5 years old and perfect in every way. They looked at him with curious eyes, these children who bore his features but didn't know his name. "Mama," Luna whispered. "Who was that man?" Rosalinda's hand moved protectively to rest on her daughter's head. "This is an old friend, Mija. Why don't you and Mateo go play in the garden while Mama talks with him?" She led him to an elegant sitting room filled with afternoon light and the scent of jasmine from the garden. Every detail spoke of taste and prosperity. Persian rugs, antique furniture, fresh flowers in crystal vases. This wasn't the struggling single mother he'd imagined, but a woman who'd built her own empire. "You look he began, then stopped, overwhelmed. Different? She supplied, settling gracefully into a chair across from him. 5 years changes a person, Joaquin. Especially when you're raising twins alone. The words hit him like physical blows. Rosalinda, I thought. Valentina told me you lost them. But there were complications. Her expression hardened. Valentina told you many things, I'm sure. But my children were never lost. I lost you, but I never lost them. But the lawyer, the separation papers, were exactly what they appeared to be. I wanted you out of my life, Joaquin. Completely. I didn't want you to know about Mateo and Luna because I couldn't trust you to put them first. Through the window, they could see the children playing on an elaborate swing set, their laughter floating on the breeze. Joaquin's heart clenched watching them. His children, these beautiful beings he'd never held, never read stories to, never tucked into bed. Tell me about them, he said quietly. Rosalinda's expression softened slightly. Mateo wants to be an astronaut. He builds rockets out of cardboard boxes and knows the names of all the planets in 3 languages. Luna is gentler. She writes stories about fairy kingdoms and collects seashells. They're both brilliant, stubborn, and completely fearless. Like their mother. She looked at him sharply. I wasn't fearless when you knew me. I was young and in love and willing to accept whatever scraps of attention you threw my way. That woman doesn't exist anymore. The truth of it hung between them like a physical presence. This wasn't the same woman he'd married. This was someone stronger, more confident, more compelling than ever. Success suited her in ways he'd never imagined possible. I know I have no right to ask, he said carefully, but could I? Would you let me meet them? Properly. Rosalinda was quiet for a long moment, studying his face. They ask about their father sometimes. I've never lied to them, but I've never told them the whole truth either. That their father chose money and power and another woman over them. Each word was a dagger, but Joaquin accepted the pain. I deserve that. I deserve much worse. Yes, you do. She stood and walked to the window, watching her children play. But they don't deserve to grow up without knowing their father. And despite everything, I still believe there's good in you, Joaquin. There has to be, or I never could have loved you as completely as I did. Hope flickered in his chest. Does that mean? It means, she said, turning back to face him, that if you're serious about being part of their lives, you'll have to prove it. Not with money or grand gestures, but with consistency, with presence, with putting them first, even when it's inconvenient. I will. I swear to you, Rosalinda, I'll do whatever it takes. She studied him for another long moment, then nodded. We'll start slowly. One afternoon a week, here at the house where they feel safe. If you prove yourself trustworthy with that, maybe we can discuss more. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a chance, and Joaquin would take it. Friends, if this story is moving your heart the way it's moving mine, please take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear about second chances and the power of choosing love over ambition. The first Saturday afternoon felt like the most important job interview of Joaquin's life. He arrived at Rosalinda's house at exactly 2 p.m., carrying carefully chosen gifts, books about space for Mateo, art supplies for Luna, and flowers for Rosalinda that he'd picked himself rather than buying from an expensive florist. The children were shy at first, these beautiful beings who carried his features, but had grown up hearing stories about a father who lived far away. But gradually they began to warm to his presence. Are you really our papa? Luna asked during their 3rd visit, her small hand slipping into his as they sat on the garden swing. Yes, Mija, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'm really your papa. Where have you been? Mateo asked with the directness that only children possess. Joaquin glanced at Rosalinda, who was watching from the patio. She told him this moment would come, that he'd need to find age-appropriate ways to explain his absence. I was lost, he said finally. I was so busy working that I forgot what was really important. But I'm not lost anymore. Mama says you build buildings for oil, Luna said. I do. That's not good for the earth, Mateo added seriously. We learned about pollution in school. Out of the mouths of babes. Joaquin found himself having to explain not just his physical absence, but the moral complexities of his work to 2 5-year-olds who'd been raised by a woman building her fortune on sustainable energy. You're right, he said. My work hasn't always been good for the earth. But maybe we can figure out how to make it better together. Over the following months, Saturday afternoons became the highlight of Joaquin's week. He learned that Mateo was indeed fascinated by space, but also loved building elaborate structures with whatever materials he could find. Luna adored stories and had a gift for seeing magic in ordinary things. More importantly, he learned that being a father had nothing to do with money or power or the size of your empire. It was about showing up, consistently and completely, for the small moments that build into a lifetime of love. Joaquin found himself changing in ways he'd never expected. Board meetings that once seemed crucial were rescheduled around bedtime stories. International conference calls were cut short when Luna scraped her knee and needed comfort. For the first time in his adult life, something mattered more than Vega Petroleum. Rosalinda watched it all with cautious approval. She was polite but distant, treating him like a co-parent rather than someone she'd once loved with her whole heart. Sometimes, though, he caught her looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not love, certainly, but not indifference either. The breakthrough came on a rainy Saturday when Luna came down with a fever. Joaquin had driven up from Los Angeles for his weekly visit, only to find a sick little girl who wanted nothing more than to be held. "I should go," he said quietly, not wanting to intrude on family time. But Luna's small hand caught his. "Stay, Papa," she whispered, the first time either child had used that term without prompting. "Will you read me a story?" Joaquin spent the afternoon holding his daughter while she dozed fitfully, occasionally waking to ask for water or another story. When she finally fell into peaceful sleep, he found Rosalinda watching from the doorway. "Thank you," she said softly. "You didn't have to stay." "Yes, I did," he replied, gently stroking Luna's hair. "She's my daughter. This is where I belong." Something shifted in Rosalinda's expression, a crack in the careful walls she'd built around her heart. For just a moment, he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with all those years ago, the one who'd believed in forever. "Joaquin," she began, then stopped, uncertainty clouding her features. "What is it, mi amor?" The endearment slipped out before he could stop it, and he saw her breath catch. "I never told you," she said quietly, moving closer, "what it was like. Raising them alone, building the company, starting over. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I was strong enough to do it all. But you were," he said, awe in his voice. "You were stronger than I ever imagined possible. I had to be. They needed me to be." She sat on the edge of the bed, her hand hovering near his before settling on Luna's forehead to check her temperature. "But sometimes I wondered, if things had been different. I think about that too," he admitted. "Every day. About the man I should have been, the father I should have been from the beginning." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their daughter sleep. Outside, the rain had stopped, and golden afternoon light streamed through the windows. "Rosalinda," Joaquin said finally, "I know I don't deserve another chance. I know what I did was unforgivable. But these months with Mateo and Luna, they've shown me what really matters. Not the company, not the money, not any of it. Just family, just love." She looked at him with those dark eyes that had haunted his dreams for 5 years. "And what exactly are you asking for, Joaquin?" "A chance to court you again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "To prove that I'm not the same man who hurt you. To show you that I've learned what it means to put the people you love first." Rosalinda was quiet for so long that Joaquin thought she might refuse. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "I'm not the same woman you married," she warned. "I won't make it easy for you. I won't just fall into your arms because you've figured out how to be a decent father." "I know," he said, bringing her hand to his lips and pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You're even more incredible now than you were then. And I plan to spend however long it takes proving that I'm worthy of the woman you've become." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "We'll see about that, Mr. Vega." It was a beginning, fragile and uncertain, but real. As Luna stirred in his arms and Mateo appeared in the doorway wondering if his sister was feeling better, Joaquin felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years, complete contentment. He built an empire of steel and oil, conquered markets and accumulated wealth beyond imagination. But holding his daughter while the woman he'd never stopped loving sat beside him, watching their son's concerned face brighten when Luna smiled, this was the only victory that mattered. Outside, the California sun broke through the clouds, casting everything in golden light. For the first time in 5 years, Joaquin Vega was exactly where he belonged. The road back to Rosalinda's heart would be long and uncertain. She'd built walls around herself that wouldn't crumble easily, and he'd have to prove himself worthy of her trust again and again. But as Luna snuggled closer and whispered, "I love you, Papa," Joaquin knew he'd spend the rest of his life earning his way back to this family he'd been fool enough to abandon. Some mistakes were too precious to make twice. This time, he wouldn't let go. If this story has moved your heart today, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our stories of love, redemption, and second chances. 2 years later, Joaquin stood in the backyard of the modest home he bought just 10 minutes from Rosalinda's mansion. It wasn't the sprawling estate he could have afforded, but it was exactly what his children needed, a place where they could bike between houses, where bedtime stories could happen spontaneously, where Saturday afternoons had grown into Wednesday dinners and Sunday picnics. Vega Petroleum still existed, still turned massive profits, but Joaquin had stepped back from day-to-day operations. He discovered that wealth meant nothing if you had no one to share it with, and power was worthless if it cost you the people you loved most. He and Rosalinda weren't married, not yet. She'd made him earn back her trust one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of putting family first at a time. But they were together in all the ways that mattered, building something better than what they'd had before. "Papa," Mateo called from the swing set. "Watch this." Joaquin looked up to see his son attempting to swing so high he could touch the sky, his face bright with joy and determination. Luna sat nearby, writing in the journal she'd started keeping, documenting their family story in her careful 7-year-old handwriting. "I'm watching, Mijo," Joaquin called back, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Rosalinda appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his as naturally as breathing. "Any regrets?" she asked softly. Joaquin thought about the empire he'd built, the billions he'd accumulated, the power he'd wielded. Then he looked at his children playing in their modest backyard, listened to their laughter floating on the evening breeze, felt the warmth of the woman he'd never stopped loving standing beside him. "Only one," he said, "that it took me so long to come home." Friends, if this story has touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to choose love over ambition, family over fortune, presence over prestige. The greatest legacy we can leave isn't measured in dollars or achievements. It's measured in the lives we touch and the love we share. What lesson spoke to your heart today? Share in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Lux Love Chronicles for more stories of hope, redemption, and the triumph of the human spirit. Until next time, this is Mr. Wentworth reminding you that every ending can be a new beginning, and every heart can find its way home. God bless you all, and thank you for being part of our growing family. We'll see you in the next story.